A century ago, the London and North Eastern Railway built Gresley A1 Pacific number 1472. Later numbered 4472 and later 60103, the engine ran the LNER's prestigious 10 a.m. express service of the same name and other East Coast mainline trains for 40 years, until being preserved by Alan Pegler. Since then, she's toured America, toured Australia, changed owners a few times, became part of the National Collection in 2004, yada yada yada. You've heard it all before by now. People keep asking me why I haven't done a video on Flying Scotsman to mark her 100th Factory Liberation Day, but the thing is, there's already so much Scotsman content out there that there isn't much left for me to add. Anthony Cools did a video for Curator with a Camera, Train of Thought did a video, Jago Hazard did a video, Terrier Stepney 55 did a video. I already did a video shortly after the engine's 2016 overhaul. So what can I do about her that the whole world and their granddads haven't? Well, after looking around for a couple of months, it turns out there might be an aspect of the locomotive's history that people already know about, but doesn't really get as much attention as the rest of the engine. That being the 1929 feature film of the same name. What's it all about? Spoiler alert, you've been warned. In 1929, the Flying Scotsman service has commenced running non-stop between London King's Cross and Edinburgh Waverley. The service's regular driver, Old Bob, played by Moore Marriott before he became one of Will Hayes' right-hand men, is retiring soon. But not before he catches his fireman Crow, played by Alec Hurley, not to be confused with the Alec Hurley who died in 1913, drinking on the job. Crow swears he'll get even with Bob, but he's quickly replaced by young Jim, played by Ray Milland in his first movie role, long before he changed accents and made a name for himself in films like Dial M for Murder. Letting his promotion get to his head, Jim befriends a woman named Joan, played by Pauline Johnson, who turns out to be Old Bob's daughter. But because of this, they have to keep their new romance a secret because Bob, get this for a cliché, is overprotective of her. But how will this tie into Crow's revenge? And how far will Crow go in order to get his revenge? So yeah, in terms of storytelling, this one is kind of by the numbers. There's a feud, a romance, an action-filled climax, the villain talks big throughout the film but doesn't go through with his actions until the third act, when there's ample time for the protagonist to alert the authorities and report him for harassment, the dad's overprotective of his daughter, etc, etc. But it's interesting that the heroine comes to the rescue here. In something like Buster Keaton's The General, the heroine is usually a bit aloof, a cliched damsel in distress who doesn't know what to do and often makes mistakes for the sake of comic relief or tension. Here though, Pauline Johnson crawls out along the side of the train at speed in high heels to keep on the villain's tail and eventually reaches the footplate via the coal pile and goes on to save the day. Much like a Buster Keaton film, this wasn't done with stunt doubles or anything like that, this was the real McCoy. If an actor tried to do this sort of stunt now, it would all be done in a studio, against a green screen, with safety nets, maybe with a safety harness that might get CGI'd out, but here it's a case of, what's health and safety? It all adds to part of the analogue age that this film came from, an age where special effects were minimal and most of the camera angles were literally done either on a parallel line or on the train itself. The resulting shots demonstrate the unique technical aspects of the LNER, including the corridor in the tender. It's also interesting to note some of the locomotives and rolling stock employed by the LNER at that time. We often liken them to being the most technically advanced of the Big Four, but the reality is they were still using hundreds of pre-grouping locomotives well into the 1930s. There's the odd Hunt and Shire Class 440 here and there. There's an old North British J-Class 440 at one point, an N2 at another. The engine in the opening shot is number 2565, Mary Hampton. Even Flying Scotsman herself is accurately depicted with right-hand drive, which she stayed in right up until 1954. What dates the film most of all, though, is when it goes from being a silent one to being a speaking one about halfway through. This came out during the transition period when silent films were slowly giving way to full-on talkies. Believe it or not, audiences couldn't initially comprehend the concept of being able to hear what they saw in a motion picture. Most film historians would tell you that Alfred Hitchcock's Blackmail was the first full-on sound film, but archivist John Huntley, who we have to thank for a massive collection of old British newsreels and feature films, suggests that this film might have been the first one. That being said, some of the acting does sort of remind us of that earlier period. The characters perform with so much expression and body movement that you could almost mute the film and you would still get the gist of what's going on. Mind you, that's not the thing that this film is infamous for. During the climax, the locomotive is uncoupled from the rest of the train on the move, and yeah, that's it. It's well known that Gresley heavily disapproved of this scene, hence the film had to be distributed with a disclaimer at the beginning stating that creative license had been taken with the way railways work, and yeah, when you look at it on face value, it is ridiculous, like something out of Wallace and Gromit. Now, in order to understand why this is a big deal in the UK, the vast majority of steam-hauled services back in the day used 3-chain tension link couplings. In order to uncouple on the move, you have to loosen the coupling by slackening the tension link, slowing the engine down so the whole train can buffer up to the engine, and then you can unhook the chain. Here though, just one pull of a tiny chain and ping! Runaway train sim moment. Now, to be fair, the film shows that Buckeye coupler technology did exist in the UK and it was being used in the film. So if you apply that sort of logic, maybe it might be possible for the engine to be detached while on the move. But in the following shots, you notice the engine's Buckeye hook is deactivated, meaning the chain coupling must have been in use if the loco was coupled at all. On top of that, anyone who knows how the braking system works would call out the coaches freewheeling like that. One break in the vacuum pipe connection from the ejector on the locomotive and the train's brakes would simply slam on. So it's pretty obvious to rail fans that the coaches were being pushed by another engine in these shots, but the paying public who wouldn't know how trains work may not have thought twice about this. At least that's probably what the filmmakers had in mind, but in reality, Gresley quickly became annoyed with people claiming that the LNER hadn't heard of vacuum brakes. So if the LNER wanted this as a publicity piece, then it almost certainly must have backfired. Maybe nobody told Gresley this was supposed to be a work of fiction? So, yeah, compared to the likes of the General or the Wrecker, The Flying Scotsman is by far and away not the best railway-related motion picture to come out of the 1920s. But considering how primitive filming technology was at that time, I'd say it makes for an interesting talking point. The story is pretty standard for sure, and the acting is definitely a bit over the top in some places, but there's a number of interesting angles, interesting background motive power here and there, the transition from silent to sound technology is something that's worth talking about, and the tale of how Gresley didn't like it will never not be interesting. The film is available on DVD, and if you're mildly curious about Scotsman's history, early film studies, and anything involving the LNER, then I'd say it's worth at least one viewing of your time. Just go in with a bit of an open mind over how railways work. I'm Chris, and I'm here to gauge the issue.
I lost my mind in lockdown, time and time again. I lost my